Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the main stage. I hope you guys had a great conversation in the networking and an expo, and that will be available for the next half hour after the main stage session, so make sure to go back. It's going to be great. For folks who are new to Michigan Battle of the Buildings, welcome. We're the Michigan Energy Summit that celebrates the Michigan Battle of the Buildings competition for the biggest losers every year. From now, every Thursday until the main event in 2 Thursdays from now, when we will celebrate the awardees of the Michigan Battle of the Buildings. So stay tuned this time every Thursday until the celebration. We're really looking forward to having you. If this is your first time on Hop-In or to the Virtual Energy Summit, let me just give a quick tutorial of what's going to happen here. So right now we're on the main stage, and if you're just tuning in, networking and expo are available on your left. And on the right side, you'll see that you have the chat function for event and for stage. So think of the stage as if you are like having the microphone and talking straight to the stage and everybody in the room. But the event would be like if you're speaking to anybody in the platform, no matter where they are, maybe like a broadcast over the intercom, you know what I mean? So that's how you can interact with both of these sessions, be able to speak to them straight as we're talking. Also, there's going to be polls. If you see, there's chat and polls. And polls will be going on as we're having our conversation as a way to get your feedback and keep you engaged, and because we're really curious on what you have to say. So if there's any questions as the stage goes on, feel free to send something into the chat in the stage or event, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. But without further ado, we're going to have our keynote speaker today speak with us. It's going to be Ken Randazzo from DTE. Ken Randazzo is the manager of the Energy Waste Reduction Program, Commercial and Industrial Business Programs at DTE. Over the last 5 years, DTE has been a visionary partner with Michigan Battle of the Buildings and the Michigan Energy Summit. And so Ken is here today to speak about what DTE's vision is for the future and the roadmap for achieving such. Really grateful to have you speak today. Ken, may you please come up on stage. There we are, Ken. Thank you so much for speaking with us today, Ken. It's really fun getting to know you over the last couple of days. And I'm gonna leave and take it away.
All right. Thank you, Julian, and welcome everyone. Let me share my screen and then we can get started. So today what I would like to talk about is Dte Energy and Michigan's clean energy future. As Jillian said, I am responsible for the commercial industrial energy efficiency programs at DTE for both the electric company and DTE Gas. And I'm also responsible for energy managers that we put in customer facilities under contract, or I have a group also that goes out to meet with customers on an ad hoc basis to help them identify energy efficiency projects. I've been with the company a number of years now and been in several different areas. So today the main topic is going to be Michigan's clean energy future, but first I'm going to talk a little bit about DTE and what makes up Dte Energy. Then I'm going to talk about Michigan DTE's bold goal for the future, and then finish up with tying it all together and how energy efficiency or energy waste reduction fits into our bold plan. So this is just a little bit about Dte Energy. Dte Energy is actually the holding company of several different companies. We have 2 regulated businesses, DTE Electric and DTE Gas. DTE Electric was formerly Detroit Edison. DTE Gas was formerly Mishcon or MCN Energy. And today we have 9 competitive business units. Competitive business units are non-regulated business units. The 2 electric company and the gas company are regulated by the Public Service Commission, and they only operate in Michigan. The competitive businesses operate all over the United States. As you can see from the map, and it happens to be my upper right-hand corner, we have operations in over 20 states. mostly, obviously, through our unregulated businesses. Our operating revenue is somewhere between 13 and 14 billion. So let me talk a little bit about DTE Electric. DTE Electric owns and operates 24/7 energy sources and the smart grid. And we're building a renewable portfolio, which I will discuss a little bit later on. And in total, DTE Electric has about 11,000 megawatt hours of power capacity or energy sources. Over 1,100 are renewable today, and it's growing. We serve 2.2 million customers, as you can see from the slide on the left. It's all in Southeast Michigan. So it's a very concise area. I think it's 7,600 square miles. And we are the largest electric utility in the state of Michigan, one of the largest in the nation, with 2.2 million customers. DTE Gas is purchases, sells, stores natural gas. We have a distribution system throughout the state. As you can see, we operate in the Upper Peninsula, northern lower Michigan, and then we have this area down here in Southeast Michigan. At DTE, we call it our overlap territory, where we supply both the electricity and the natural gas. We have 280 storage wells in Michigan, representing about 34% of the underground capacity. DTE Gas has 1.2 million customers, and it's one of the nation's largest natural gas utilities. These are just some of the unregulated subsidiaries that we have. One I'll highlight, which has to do with renewable, is Dte Biomass. What we do with Dte Biomass is we purchase landfill gas, methane, from landfills and turn it into electricity. We've been operating Dte Biomass for over 20 years now. It's been a very successful business unit for us, and it will remain one of DTE's staples in the renewable energy platform. Some of the other businesses that we have, Power Industrial, for example, will buy customers' generating sites or powerhouses, as they call them, and then we'll own them and maintain them, and we'll sell BTUs back to the customer. So it's also a very good business. We've been doing that about 20 years, and then we've got our pipeline and storage business. So those are just some of the businesses. That's part of the 9 unregulated businesses that we have at DTE Energy. So DTE Energy is just not, when I joined the company, we were Detroit Edison. And today it's one of the largest utilities in the country and operates in over 20 states. So it's changed a little bit over the years, but we're still about safe, reliable, affordable energy for our customers. So what is DTE Energy's bold goal for Michigan's clean energy future? DTE Energy wants to be net carbon zero emissions by 2050. It's important and fundamental transformation in the way we're going about it. So it's been started a few years ago when we started building renewables. It's just not going to happen overnight. We've made a significant increase in our investments in renewable energy. DTE expects to cut emissions in half over the next 10 years. And the next chart I have will show where we're at and how we're going about doing it. Our gas company is also planning to have net zero greenhouse gases. They have a plan that includes their operations as well as our suppliers and customers' operations. It's going to be a 3-prong approach. You can't do it without everybody participating in the program. DTE Gas is expected to reduce about 6 million metric tons, which is equivalent to taking 1.3 million cars off the road. These all fit into our mission, and part of our overall mission is still, like I said earlier, it remains providing safe, reliable, and affordable power to our customers in the state of Michigan. And this is how we're going to get there. This is the overall plan. By 2023, we want to be 32% carbon free By 2030, we plan to be 50% carbon free. And then by 2040, we'll be 80% carbon free. And by 2050, both DTE Electric and DTE Gas will be net zero carbon free. It's a bold plan that's going to take resources and time. It just can't happen overnight. And so this is our bold goal for the future. We started it, like I said, several years ago, and we started building our renewable portfolio. So let me talk a little bit now about what our renewable portfolio consists of. Wind. We have wind turbines all over the state of Michigan. Since 2009, DTE has invested over $2.5 billion and built 14 wind parks. We've got 4 additional wind parks that will be completed this year, and those are in the central part of the state, Gratiot Township, I think it's called. And so part of building the wind sources, we obviously need the transmission to get it into the grid. So that is also part of the overall plan. So over the next 5 years, DTE is planning on an additional $2 billion investment in just renewable energy. Renewable energy is going to be a big part of our plan, as we'll see going forward. We've also got solar. We have 31 solar parks in our renewable energy portfolio. One of them is called Lapeer Solar Park, and it happens to be the largest solar park east of the Mississippi River. It's 40 or 50 megawatts, if I remember. Uses over 200,000 solar panels and can generate enough electricity to power 11,000 homes. And from the air, when the solar panels are in the upright position, it's in 240 acres. It looks like a big lake out there. It's just an amazing sight. That picture up top is part of our Lapeer solar park. DTE is the largest solar producer in the state of Michigan. So we've been reviewing both wind and solar, and they are a big part of how we're going to get to our bold goal for Michigan's clean energy future. By 2030, at least 25% of the DTE energy resources will come from renewable power. DTE will have over 10 million solar panels. So solar is going to become an even more important part of our portfolio. We've spent a lot of time and effort on our wind parks, but in the future, we will be doing both wind and solar. They're generating enough power to power over 500,000 homes already in Michigan. And that number will continue to grow as we build more and more wind parks and solar parks. Business and residential customers can also buy clean energy to meet their own sustainable goals. We have a program called Michigan Green Power, and it allows customers to buy their own renewable energy sources. And I just talked to our manager leading that program, and we are subscribed out into 2023. So it's a very successful program. We are not going to take our foot off the pedal. This is part of we work here, we live here. It's part of our community, part of our responsibility to build a Michigan's clean energy future for the sustainable future. However, as you know, we all live in Michigan. The wind doesn't always blow, and the sun doesn't always shine in our beautiful state. So we still need round-the-clock, 24/7 energy sources. How are we going to provide those for our customers? Well, number one is natural gas. We're building a natural gas fueled plant. It's called the Michigan Blue Water Energy Center. It is expected to be operational by 2022. When it becomes operational, it will be one of the most efficient power plants in the state of Michigan. It's a state-of-the-art, low-emission energy source that can provide electricity to over 850,000 homes. Our gas company is obviously helping drive an industry-wide movement toward cleaner natural gas production, and their roadmap is also, like I said earlier, it's 3 parts to it. You got to include the suppliers, the customers, as well as our own operation. So this plant is called a combined cycle power plant. And when I first came to Detroit Edison several years ago, I studied combined cycle plants, and now we're finally building one. And it is more efficient than our coal and nuclear plants as well. It's a cleaner, cheaper, it's easier to transport natural gas than anything else that we have. So in the future, we may build more, because you can't rely just on the wind and the sun. Like we said, it doesn't always shine in Michigan, and it doesn't always blow in Michigan. So also part of our 24/7 energy source is Fermi 2, our nuclear plant. It's been in operation since 1986, I believe, 87, something like that. It is completely emission-free, and it's a 24/7 power source that has been very successful for us. We had to apply for renew our operating license, so we did that in 2016. We applied and got approved. It was basically a 2-year process to renew our operating license for Fermi. It will continue to operate. It's part of our plan, our integrated resource plan, to the year 2045. So we hope to get another 25 years of generation from Fermi 2. It's around the clock. It's about 1,100 megawatts. When you dispatch our 24/7 energy sources, Fermi is usually one of the first ones dispatched, because it's such a low-cost plant and it's emission-free. Coal, we'll still continue to have some coal plants, but our coal plants, we plan on retiring 3 plants by 2022. That equates to about 20% of our generating capacity of coal. It's been providing, these 3 plants have provided about 1.2 million homes with power. They've been operating for many, many years. Some of them were built in the 50s, late 40s, 50s, even into the 60s. We'll continue to maintain a couple of our coal-fired plants. However, we do plan to retire all of our remaining coal plants by 2040. While our plants have been generating and providing reliable and affordable electricity to businesses and homes for decades, we want to move forward as quickly as possible. And so we'll be retiring all our coal plants by 2040. Like I said, they've been providing safe, reliable, and affordable electricity for decades. And we want renewables, but we need backup. We need 24/7 operation, because when the light switch goes on, people expect the lights to turn on. And so we will continue to have 24/7 generation to complement our renewable energy sources that we're building. So what's the importance of energy waste reduction, and how does it fit into Michigan's clean energy future? Well, for one, we can provide options for our customers to save money and energy. And if we can reduce the energy that customers consume, that means it's less energy we have to produce, which is then in turn means less emissions that will be produced. Programs are available for all residential customers and business customers. We've worked very hard to develop a diverse portfolio of energy efficiency programs for both businesses and residential customers. We take pride in the fact that we've got programs that all customers can take advantage of. from the very largest for business, for example, from the very largest business customers to the very smallest business customers. We want to provide opportunities for all of our customers to take advantage of this. DTE Energy's energy efficiency programs are assisting and leading the way to a cleaner, safer, smarter energy future for our customers and for our state. This is the commercial and industrial platform and portfolio of programs that we have in our energy waste reduction programs. And I put them in platforms so that we could strategically focus on different parts of our business to ensure that we've got programs available for all of our customers to participate in. We've worked very hard to establish our small business platform. We've got 2 programs in there now with 2 or 3 that we're testing, and I'll talk about those in the next slide. Business Energy Consultation, we focus on smaller customers up to maybe $13,000 annual revenue. And then small business focus. And in both of these programs, the small business focus goes to what we might call maybe a little bit larger, small to mid-sized type customer. And both of those programs focus on providing customers with an energy assessment to help them identify where there are opportunities for energy efficiency. We also provide some direct install measures, and then we're working with contractors or trade allies, as we call them, to help customers implement the efficiencies opportunities that we've identified. Our Midstream platform that we started about 5 years ago has now 3 programs in it. We have a lighting, food service, and HVAC. Midstream is basically, we've taken it and move back to the distributors, where the distributors can touch many more people than we can as a one-to-one customer relationship kind of thing. So they work with the trade allies that buy products from them at the distributor level. And if we get enough requests for it, distributors will start to change their stocking patterns to stock higher efficient products. It's also a little bit different because there's no application required. It's instant rebate at the counter, so to speak. Customer comes in, buys the food serving equipment for their business, has to meet certain requirements, obviously, and then they get the instant rebate right at the counter. Our downstream platform consists of what I call our traditional energy waste reduction. It's 2 programs that we started with, are prescriptive and non-prescriptive. That's how we started our energy waste reduction programs in 2009. They're still there. They're still very successful. It's very more traditional. The customer submits an application. We approve the application. The customer then installs through their trade ally. Usually they can install it themselves if they want to, but it's usually through a trade ally. Then they submit a final application. We review it. We may have to go out and inspect it. And then we provide the customer the incentive. And in some cases, the trade ally just takes the incentive off of the price of the equipment. But it's a very traditional, it's a program that we first started our energy waste reduction with in 2009, and we've maintained it, and it's very, very successful. And we've added some little, I wouldn't say nuances, but we've added so we can focus a little bit more on the new construction industry. We want to focus on our Michigan agribusiness industry. So we've got separate applications. We've tried to identify products for those programs. And so those are, we basically have 4 different programs within the downstream platform. We started an operational platform a couple years ago. The operational platform is focused on low cost, no cost savings. And we call them operational because it's about operating your system. I call replacing your LED lamp, for example, that's energy efficiency. Now controlling it is energy conservation, and that's where the operational comes in. Most of our programs, we have 2 of them, retro commissioning and strategic energy management, and they both require that the customer has a building automation system or building management system. And we'll go in and evaluate the management system. We'll evaluate what the set points are on it. We'll look for low cost, no cost, things that the customer can do to reduce their consumption through changing how they operate their businesses. Strategic energy management is very focused. We'll look at all the processes within a customer's location. We do industrial, we do hospitals. Retro commissioning is about optimizing the HVAC system, more or less. Last program that we have is our energy assessment platform. We'll go out and do energy assessments, and we'll help customers put a strategic energy plan together. Strategic energy plan is basically for multi-site customers. We'll help them put a 5-year program together. We know that customers, all of us, don't have enough capital to do everything in 1 year, so we'll help customers put a plan together of what they can do in year 1, 2, 3, and then we'll continue, or the customer will continue to maintain that plan and update it. Some additional things that we're doing, we now have responsibility for our emerging programs, or pilots as we call them sometimes. We did an energy auction. Energy auction is a way of capturing additional savings at a low cost, because we'll go out and auction it. It's kind of like if you ever participate on eBay. eBay is the highest price gets it, and our energy auction, it's the lowest price gets it. And so we've made a commitment to try and do that. We've also got some other programs for, these are more for our small businesses. We'll find and fix them. We'll go out and identify steam traps, air compressors. That's 2 separate programs. One is for gas, one is for electric. So we're trying to find specific programs that our customers can take advantage of, that we know there are energy savings out there. Grocer Smart is another program that we're testing. It's for obviously our small grocery stores. You can also go into larger grocery stores, but we've tried basically working with small grocery stores because we know we have over 1,100 of what we classify as smaller grocery stores within our service territory. So it's a large number of customers. So it's a large vertical market, as I call them. We've tried business energy reports. They're a report where we'll, specific to that customer, help that customer identify where they're using energy, and we'll send them a report that says, here's how you're using energy, here's what we can do to help you, here's some suggestions of where you can go, and then here's some call to action. Part of that call to action, which I don't even have listed here, is we're building a online marketplace. We have one in our residential side of the business, and we're testing it on the commercial side as well. The other thing we are looking at is called virtual retro commissioning, where we don't even have to go out into the customer's location. With a pandemic, that's going to be key for us. So we're testing that this year, and we may commercialize it or roll it into our portfolio next year. The other thing we're working on is, I call it the Cohort Sustainability Group, and it's about helping like the 2030 districts and all of our customers incorporate utility data directly into Energy Star portfolio, and then helping them identify areas in their fleet of buildings where they can make changes to their consumption by installing energy efficient equipment. And we also work with I call them our financing partners, but we have a good relationship. We have special programs with Michigan Saves and PACE, and then customers can, we call it self-direct, but customers can take responsibility and put their own energy efficiency plan together on both the gas side and the electric side of the company. There's an enrollment period. There's lots of details that go along with that self-direct. It's just not raising your hand saying, I want to do this. You got to supply a plan. You got to meet the same targets that we have to meet. And you got to review the plan and got to submit an annual report. So it's a very detailed program, but they're available to customers that want to perform their own energy efficiency programs. The commercial and industrial accomplishments since 2009, basically. When we started, we wanted to ensure that we had wide and varied participation in the state of Michigan. And the photo on the left shows where we have had participation within our energy waste reduction programs. And you can see that we have touched all parts of our service territory for both the electric company and the gas company. It's very important for us that we have many programs that all customers could take advantage of so that we can have varied participation. It's important. Not every customer is, one of our largest customers that can pretty much do what they choose. So we've tried to find programs that will help our smallest customers that don't have the capital available to them. We've introduced 4 new platforms. Those new platforms I just talked about, they were small business, midstream, and operational, and the energy assessment platform. We've introduced 10 new programs along with those platforms. Our programs looking over the state, over the United States, excuse me, the United States, DTE's programs are considered best in class. Our midstream program, for example, has been reviewed and assessed, and we've given several presentations on it of how successful we've been with our midstream programs. And the introduction of HVAC and food service just goes in line with that. We were one of the first utilities in the country that established those 3 midstream programs and went one step further in guaranteeing or verifying that customers that participated in those programs were in fact DTE customers. So we do customer verification. Obviously, with all our programs, you got to be a DTE, either gas customer or DTE electric customer. And the midstream programs, most of the ones in the country did not do that. We needed to do that. Since 2009, we've done over 70,000 projects. We've paid out over $250 million in electric and gas incentives, and we've estimated our customers are saving combined $675 million of operating costs between their electric efficiencies that they've implemented and their gas efficiencies that they've implemented. And just recently, DTE was recognized by ACEEE for expanding the number of programs that we've created within our portfolio in both residential and commercial. So we have a very successful energy waste reduction program. It's going to be a big part of our future for creating clean energy in the state of Michigan. And with that, I want to say thank you. And there's my contact information. And with that, I think I sign off now.
Thank you, Ken. What a great job.
Thank you.
I love the presentation. For folks interested in talking more with Ken or seeing this presentation through Ken, would be connecting with him on a one-on-one or group Q&A in the Expo Center after this main stage. So if you need a refresher on how to get to the Detroit 2030 District booth in Expo, go ahead and ask in the chat. We'll be able to send it your way. But we're very thankful to have Ken explain what DTE is planning to do for the future. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to go to the Detroit 2030 District booth in the Expo session after the main stage. And now I'm really excited to bring on our our panelists to have a conversation with all of you today. The group that we have coming up is 3 incredible women to talk about how we achieve carbon neutrality within our cities and our communities. So on the main stage, we'll have Dr. Sarah Mills. She's the Senior Project Manager at the Graham Sustainability Institute and lecturer at University of Michigan. And she'll be our moderator today. And we have 2 amazing panelists. We have Dr. Missy Stultz. She's the Sustainability Innovations Manager at the City of Ann Arbor, and Allison Waskey-Sutter. She's the Sustainability and Performance Management Officer for the City of Grand Rapids. And I could not think of 3 better people to lead this conversation. So please take it away, Sarah.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me. And I'm really excited about this panel. To kind of set the groundwork in talking about carbon neutrality, I think it's important to acknowledge that Governor Whitmer announced right at the beginning of last month her intention to move the state toward economy-wide carbon neutrality by 2050. And that's not just in the electricity sector. That's also the direct energy use by buildings as for heating. It's throughout the industrial sector and in the transportation sector. Her executive order and executive directive kind of put the wheels in motion for the process to figure out what the pathways are to get us there. But I think what might have been missed is a couple weeks before that announcement, she had a separate announcement about the Catalyst Communities program. which is to help elevate the work that communities across the state have been taking with regard to carbon neutrality. Last fall, the University of Michigan, in conjunction with EGLE, the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, conducted a survey of local officials across the state. We heard back from 75%, so it's 1,350 responses. And that survey asked local officials a range of questions about what they're doing with respect to energy. There's a whole bunch of data there that I'm happy to talk about. If you're interested, you can chat me and I can share with you the kind of public results. But most relevant, I think, for our discussion today is that over 100 jurisdictions in the state say they have some sort of renewable energy goals for their municipal operations or for community-wide emissions, or are considering them right now. And many more local governments are really starting to think not just about renewable energy, but about carbon neutrality. So with that groundwork, I'm really excited to moderate this panel between two of those cities that are really leading the charge on carbon neutrality. I'm interested in learning from them. And so just to kind of ground this in terms of format, what I'm going to do is start by having each of them talk about what their cities have been up to. And I have some questions teed up, but please feel free to use the chat function to submit your questions, and I will weave them into the conversation. I also want to let you know that earlier on, Jillian mentioned kind of the interactive polls. There's a bunch of those teed up too. So if you want to multitask and tell us how what your organizations are doing and thinking about carbon neutrality, check out the polls because we'll be posting a number of them throughout the discussion. That's my long introduction. And now I'm going to turn it over to the experts, to the cities who have been doing this. And so, Missy, do you want to start out by giving us a thumbnail sketch of what the city of Ann Arbor is doing with respect to energy?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. And thanks, Allison, for sharing time with me. It's always a delight to be able to have conversations with you aspirational leaders. So Ann Arbor has a really aggressive goal. I'm glad that our utilities shared their goal too. Shave some time off that when you want to talk about what Ann Arbor is striving to do. We have a goal of being carbon neutral as an entire community in a decade. So by 2030, we would like to be net zero emissions in the entire community, every resident, every business, the University of Michigan, government operations, you name it. So we have a plan, it's called A20. And it outlines seven overarching strategies and 44 actions that'll help us get there. And we created that plan with extensive public engagement. You'll hear about that in a little while. It was fast, it was furious, and it's scientifically necessary. And so I can imagine some people on the line, people here did it too, sort of said, how are you going to do this? This is impossible. Well, we're going to figure that out because there really is no other choice. In terms of what the science is telling us, in terms of the impacts, in terms of the public health crisis that we're facing. There are so many co-benefits to this action. And so we're working with our industry, we're working with our community-based organizations, we're working with equity-centered organizations to really make sure this work is grounded in our people, in our place, that it creates new jobs, that it is transferable and scalable across the state. So we're working with the governor's office on this as well, and then certainly working with our peers like Allison in Grand Rapids and others to figure out how can we leverage the experience in other places, because we just simply don't have time to replicate what's happening. So we steal profusely from our peers, but the intent here with A20 is a just and equitable transition to community-wide carbon neutrality in the next 10 years. And you'll hear more about that in a little bit.
Allison, can you kind of give us the thumbnail sketch of what's going on in Grand Rapids?
Yeah, thanks, Missy. Thanks, Sarah. As Missy said, it's always fantastic to work with all of these amazing professionals and those at the U.S. Green Building Council as well. So thanks for putting this on and having us here today. I really applaud Missy and her team, and the work that they've been doing is phenomenal in terms of the fact that they were able to get their plan passed and have conversations around budget needs and be very upfront about that and what that looks like. So with respect to the city of Grand Rapids, we have a citywide strategic plan that was passed April of last year. And I want to just note that in there, 3 of our key values. We have 6 core values across the city, but it's sustainability, equity, and collaboration. And I think that that really ties into this conversation and why it's so important to be engaging our communities and to be leading with equity to achieve our environmental sustainability goals. We do have a health and environment section, and we have a number of strategies specific to our municipal operations about reducing carbon and our own carbon goals. But quite frankly, all of city operations probably only account for about 5% of the entire city of Grand Rapids community carbon emissions. And so really wanting to transition and be more focused on the community and what can we be doing to help support our community decrease carbon emissions, and then which will be the focus of today. But I know Missy's done a lot of work, and I learned a lot from her around climate adaptation strategies as well. But I do want to share a little bit about a project that we entered into called the Zero Cities Project. It's a national project that was offered by the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. 11 cities across the country participated, only 2 in the Midwest, Minneapolis and ourselves. And really that goal, or the goal of that, it was a 3-year program that we're wrapping up in the next month or so, was how do we essentially equitably decarbonize the building sector with this ultimate ideal goal of achieving 0 net carbon emissions by 2050. This project did not include industrial facilities, nor did it include parking. So it was really focused on commercial buildings, multifamily, and single family residential. And I just want to share a few things from that, because I think that that was some important lessons. And Grand Rapids is a little different. I know we have a wide audience across the state of Michigan, so I won't go into too much details, but we have about 205 million square feet of buildings in the city of Grand Rapids. And what's interesting, and probably a little different for Grand Rapids, but maybe similar to Ann Arbor, although that with the big university there, it's probably a little different. 52% of all the square footage within the city boundaries is actually single family residential. And our other peers in this project were the big cities, right, across the country. And they have very little single family residential within their city property or city boundaries. It's mostly commercial. And so that's really quite different. And when we look at energy consumption, this probably holds true across the state of Michigan for buildings, whether you're commercial, multifamily, single family. On average, 65% of the energy being consumed is natural gas. And right, that's where a cold weather climate, we're consuming a lot of natural gas for heating. But then when you convert that into kind of your EUI, your energy use intensity, we found it interesting that when we looked at the buildings, actually going back for a minute, that we had the largest square footage of, right? Things like unrefrigerated warehouses, office, college, K through 12, right? Those are your big facilities. The bigger your facilities, the more energy you're consuming. That makes sense. But when we really drilled into energy use intensity to better understand of all of our different commercial building types, which are actually the most energy intensive. And the picture is very different, right? Fast food restaurants are almost double the intensity of any other type of commercial building that we have. The other ones, supermarkets, hospitals, restaurants. So very much in the food industry. So you have to think about that. And we now have the data to understand from a policy perspective, do you want to focus on where you have the most square footage of buildings, or do you want to focus on what your most energy intensive building types are, right? And there are just different benefits and advantages or disadvantages to each of those. But with respect to carbon emissions, some of the things that we looked at in terms of, and we looked out to 2050, and we took into consideration what we think will be the changes in our building stock between now and 2050. But really at the end of the day, 70% of our buildings are still going to be existing buildings. And a lot of cities are passing policies or requirements for new construction and are very focused on new construction. But ultimately that's going to impact a pretty small percentage of your buildings. And so we're taking that into consideration and thinking about the fact that most of them are going to be existing buildings. And really the 2 key takeaways for us that are driving our work are that when we look at of all the carbon emissions, 42% of building sector carbon emissions come from commercial buildings greater than 10,000 square feet. But it's actually less than 2% of all the buildings in Grand Rapids. Small number of buildings, massive amount of carbon emissions, right? So that's going to lead one of our areas of focus. But then the other is, again, going back to that single family residential, 39% of the emissions in our community come from single family residential. And that's really hard. And a lot of cities don't focus on that because you have a wide variety of obviously residents and stakeholders, and how do you engage and move in that area? But with equity really being a lead goal in this area, we partnered with our local equity partner, the Urban Core Collective, to be focused. And I have spent the majority of my time, I'm a pretty small office. I'm always envious of Missy and the phenomenal resources they have in Ann Arbor. But we really chose to be focused on single family residential for the last few years to do some engagement. And I'll talk a little bit of that around equity. But so we've been doing some things with the U.S. Green Building Council, and Sherry and her team are phenomenal partners. We are in a place where we've started to develop kind of a draft menu of possible policy options for those commercial buildings, things like energy benchmarking and transparency, electrification, building performance standards. And we're hoping to kind of launch that and start into almost a year-long engagement process throughout 2021.
Great. I do want to make sure we talk about equity. Before we do that, just so while it's fresh in my mind, Allison mentioned kind of the breakdown of which are the big contributors to emissions in Grand Rapids. I'm curious, Missy, how that compares in Ann Arbor in terms of building types, or like where are the biggest opportunities?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, for that question. And it's true, we are different. So the analysis that Allison did is actually really helpful and insightful too. And I think most communities could gain value because it lets you be really targeted. For Ann Arbor, our largest source of emissions actually come from the University of Michigan. Their institutional footprint is very large, and that makes a lot of sense when you think about the purview of services, goods that they provide in the education, of course. Second, then for us is our residential sector. And for our community, we do have single family homes for sure, but we are 55% rental. And so we have a huge focus on that rental market, as well as the residential kind of single family home space too. But residential it's a very different solution set, which we can talk about. And I would just say, kind of transitioning into that we're thinking about benchmarking too across the board. So let me take one step back and say it goes University of Michigan, our residential sector, of which rental units are the largest source, and then we fall into commercial. We don't really have an industrial sector in Ann Arbor, and so that's not particularly relevant. The solutions look different.
Got it. Both of you, the residential sector is big in both situations, and you both mentioned equity. So I want to dive a little bit deeper. And what does including equity considerations in your carbon neutrality plans or in your energy plans look like in your city? What does that engagement look like? And I mean, quite frankly, like many of these communities you've talked about have been left out of our discussions in the past, right? So how do you think your plans are different by focusing on equity? I don't know who wants to take that first.
Sure.
Allison, I think you should. Yeah.
So with respect to the Zero Cities work, as I mentioned, we have a local equity partner called the Urban Core Collective, which is a community-based organization that predominantly serves communities of color. They are not, and we're not in the environmental space whatsoever or in the climate change space whatsoever, right? So I think that that's a big important first takeaway, right? It's not just the traditional organizations that are always at the table and interested in environmental work or climate change work. We really need to start bridging out into other neighborhood and community-based organizations that truly are focused on engagement and serving our communities of color. And one of the things that was great that my colleague has taught me, right? No extraction without compensation. Don't continue to ask people of color to come to the table and provide their lived experience and their expertise that they have without compensating them. And so we were really fortunate that through our grant, $25,000 went to our equity partner for them to participate with us. And I think that's an instrumental and something that you have to think about from the forefront about having in place. And what we did, one thing that I think, we sat down with them and our first approach was going to be, okay, for some reason, our hypothesis is all of these great energy efficiency or weatherization programs are not getting to our residents of color. Why? Okay, and we had all of these reasons why, and we thought about some reasons. We thought, okay, maybe we can just package it differently and we'll be able to get more residents of color to participate, right? There are plenty of programs out there. There's a myriad of programs out there. It's very confusing. But then when we stepped back, we said, nope, that's just doing the same process that doesn't work again in trying to package it differently. And so we had some really in-depth conversations. And the way that I explain it is I say, whether it's the utility or the city or other experts in this area, what I see is, right, we go knock on the door of a resident of color and we say, aren't you interested in decarbonizing your home? And the answer is like, no, right? You know, I have a lot of other concerns that are much more top of mind and priority, thinking about, you know, my car broke down, how do I get to my job tomorrow? My child is suffering from asthma, I've got to go to the emergency room, now I got to take a day off of work, right? Like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Climate change is not top of the list for our most vulnerable populations and for those that are most in need. And trying to approach them and keep asking them from different sources and saying, why don't you, you know, you don't seem interested. Why aren't you in our energy efficiency programs or weatherization programs is the wrong question. And that's what we've learned. And so we went back and started to say, okay, let's think about this differently. We need to be approaching residents by leading with affordability. How can we help you make your home more affordable and bring down your monthly and daily living expenses? And second, how does what we can offer tie into providing better health benefits for you and your family? Because those are two more important issues to many residents across the board than climate change, quite frankly. And that's just something that we have to acknowledge. And so with that in mind, in partnership with the UCC, we let them really lead, but we co-designed some surveys. And of course, COVID threw a whole wrench in everything that we were planning to do with kind of in-person interviews and group sessions, but doing a survey tool where we're just now synthesizing the results, but really trying to understand, you know, are residents even familiar with these programs? Has anybody ever asked them if they speak Spanish? Has it ever been offered to them in Spanish from somebody they trust, right? Somebody coming with the City of Grand Rapids logo or the utility logo is probably not going to be trusted by a lot of our residents, and particularly in our communities of color. They're not the trusted sources of information. And so really trying to get at understanding some of these barriers for participation. Sometimes it's, I don't have the necessary insurance for X, Y, and Z, and that excludes me from being able to take advantage of this program. Or even at a city, maybe I have a back tax on this, so now I can't take advantage of that program. So really trying to delve into that to better understand some of those things. I still have other things I want to add for equity, but I'm going to stop and let Missy chime in from her perspective.
I mean, Allison did such a phenomenal job. I think I might just like pull out tidbits and then add a little bit of Ann Arbor kind of coloring in terms of what we did. One, I would say Allison and I believe, well, I shouldn't speak for her. You can nod if she agrees. We believe, I did it again. I believe that racial equity is really, really important in this, and leading with race is critical in this conversation. So, okay, now I see her nod. We believe that that's true. So one of the very first things that you have to do is understand the racial dynamics of your place. Ann Arbor does not look like Grand Rapids. And so solutions that we're going to use in terms of leading with equity need to be customized for our place. So race is really, really critical. And when you lead with race, you also pick up things like socioeconomic disparities because they're intrinsically tied. And for us, we are fairly affluent as a community, but we have so many people that are house poor or energy burdened, and you don't see them if you don't look. Right. And so there are different layers and analyses we have to do to really understand that just because you might live in a $300,000 house doesn't mean you're living on a $300,000 salary, or however, there's a lot that's sort of embedded in that. For us, equity manifests itself in many different ways. And I would say we're not great at it. We're on a learning journey, and we need partners, and we want partners to hold us accountable and to make us better. And so this isn't a checkbox. This is a forever journey to be better allies in this work. So one of the things we have done intentionally and purposefully is when we knew we were creating our carbon neutrality plan, we sought partners that weren't part of the conversation. We saw the local NAACP chapter, our affordable housing colleagues and alliances, our folks who are focused on accessibility and disability issues. And we asked if they would join us and make sure that they brought not carbon or climate expertise, but their lived experience and knowledge to it, and challenged everything we said. And they did. And so we were able to get 70 partner organizations. And I'll tell you what, we got all the climate groups there with us, right? But we got a whole bunch of people that have never sat in a room together. And the very first thing we did with our equity partners with our carbon neutrality partners, is we ran an equity training. We hired an equity consultant, and all of us had to sit and go through that training. And it was a normalizing, and it was saying up front, if you want to go on a journey with us around carbon neutrality, then we're going to lead with equity. And that means for most people, as Allison said, we're leading with health and safety and affordability and other quality of life variables. And it just happens that climate action touches on all of those things, but that's not the thing that we sort of lead with. So now it's, again, a continual journey. Those colleagues call us out, and appropriately so, and help us continue to learn. We have so much more work to do, but I'd say some of the programs that manifest themselves from that are, we won a grant similarly through the Partners for Places program, which has helped administer through USDN, to do an Aging in Place Efficiently program, which focuses on helping low-income seniors stay in a home of their choosing or place of their choosing for longer by giving them physical services like grab bars or ramps or whatever they may need to age in that place, but also pairing it with energy efficiency improvements that are really centered on indoor air quality and lowering their energy burden so that they have more flexible income at a time when they're not getting income. And so they're really on that margin. And this was a demographic, low-income folks, that, especially seniors, that people don't really invest in. It's a kind of morbid conversation that we were in with folks saying, well, that house is really just going to turn over, so why are you making these improvements? You're like, you're losing people. Okay? Like, you're losing people in that conversation. So we're working on that program right now with partners. Partners who don't do any energy efficiency work, they just do social services, to partners who do just energy efficiency work, and it's cross training and learning. We also have just launched an A20 Ambassadors Program, and the intent of this program, as Allison alluded to, is people may like me, but I am not the person to go into all of these communities and convince people to do this work. I'm not of all of these neighborhoods. I'm not of those places or sharing that lived experience. And so the ambassadors are an opportunity for your neighbor, your minister, someone living in an affordable housing site to get exposure to the resources that are available to them. We have, I think it's almost official, but we have our grant program to help compensate them for their time to go through that program if they're in need. And at the end of it, we're actually putting money aside for them to be able to do a project in their neighborhoods that focuses on their need. So they get to customize what's being done. So those are just some of the things that, as Allison said, there's a lot more, both that we're doing and that we need to do.
Yeah, Sarah, can I just add a couple things? Yeah,
Sure.
So I wanted to go back. Missy's absolutely right. So at Grand Rapids, right, we're 40% of non-white race or ethnicity in the city of Grand Rapids, and so we have, much larger communities and more residents of color, and so we're being very intentional. As she said, I wanted to lift up leading with racial equity, and that's very important. And I'm not going to go into too much detail here on it because it's not necessarily specific to buildings, but we're kind of in parallel launching something called the Community Collaboration on Climate Change, which is a mouthful, so we call it the C4. But again, we learn through Zero Cities, and we're leading with equity. And a couple things that I wanted to share, because it touches on Sarah's question about, what is different, is we started, and through that, right, we attempted to have at the table, we had about 20 people we had to learn. At first, we didn't have enough people of color at the table. And we said, and they came back and they pushed and they said, you're trying to do this with equity and you don't have enough people of color at the table, right? And so we went back and then added other people that they recommended to the table. And ultimately, we're around 50% of people on our planning team were people of color working in our neighborhoods. And to Missy's point, we did equity training together. We had planned 12 hours. We did 8 before COVID hit. And that is instrumental to be able to do that together and to really ground your work, as she said, in equity. But giving people who have been marginalized from these conversations the power to make the decisions. And I came in and said from the beginning, this is not a city-driven process. I do not get to make the decisions. This is a team process. We all have an equal vote, and majority consensus gets to dictate how this project is going to move forward. Because otherwise, if you just continue to solicit feedback and ask for opinions, and then you ultimately, what it might appear like is you go off and you make your own decision that does not embed the feedback and the direction that was given from your participants, you will lose them from the beginning, and rightfully so. Why would somebody want to continue to engage in those processes? And I just wanted to lift up too the part about payment and thinking about that. We are looking at through some grants, we're trying to get stipends for a steering committee, right? But I don't feel that I need to pay somebody who works for a traditional grassroots environmental organization, right? That's part of their everyday job, is to engage in these types of processes. What I do need to provide stipends for are residents who are coming to the table, who are participating as a resident, right? And they're not getting paid through their job to participate in this work. or those community-based organizations where environmental and climate change is not a part of their core mission, we've invited them to come to the table to engage in this conversation with us. And Missy already explained ambassadors. That's something that we're working on as well, and having similar ambassadors from the neighborhoods and drive projects. But in particular, the biggest things that I learned that you have to be prepared for, that at least I have learned in my experience on really trying to lead with equity, is that, again, the affordability health we've already touched on, but you have to be prepared for a much slower process, right? I mean, I came in with my normal, like, we're going to get this done in 6 months. And, you know, we got into the process and the team was like, Allison, slow down, right? Like, we are having really authentic, good equity conversations. And I'll be honest, I was like, but this grant deadline's coming up. And they're like, the grant deadline is not driving our process, right? We as a team need to work through this together. And these equity conversations are deep and meaningful, and they are going to take at least twice as much time as you think that they're going to take. And you have to be prepared and committed to have hard, uncomfortable conversations, because to really do equity work, you have to allow yourself to be vulnerable and to learn and to grow alongside the partners that you participate to the table. So those are just a couple things that, in terms of what I've learned over the last few years as I've been trying to embed this, to share with others, to be prepared if you're a little bit earlier in your journey.
Well, and I want to thank both of you for sharing that, and call people who are watching on their attention to the polls. One of the things that I'm picking up is that about half the people haven't had equity training, right? So this is not necessarily something that's pervasive throughout, at least among the attendees here. And the other thing that I want to highlight for those who don't know, one of the key elements of the governor's kind of announcements regarding carbon neutrality is the importance of it being a just and equitable transition, a just and equitable decarbonization pathway. And so I think that this is a conversation that will be elevated, that needs to be elevated. And I just want to thank you for sharing kind of what that looks like in different places. And again, that it's not always about leading with energy, right? And some of the process, my sense is, takes a little bit more time, because there's other things going on there that you're trying to figure out, like how that squares with kind of what this means for your energy plan.
Sarah, just one nuance I would say, it generally goes slow then faster is what happens when you do it this way.
True. You figure out what the issues are up front, right? Fair. I appreciate that. Again, people, please feel free to chime in on the polls. In terms of the next question to kind of get at, one of the questions was, what are you most interested in talking about? And right now, leading the poll is energy benchmarking. And so that kind of feeds well, and I think that's expected with this audience. But I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit more about how that factors, what your cities are doing on that. And also, not just within benchmarking, but what other city ordinances are you looking at that might need to change to achieve effectively your codes or your goals that might, particularly, my guess is that most of the people on the phone here are kind of commercial, industrial kind of building operators, owners, that might mesh with that might affect them. So let's see. Allison started the last one. Missy, you want to start this one?
Yeah, let's go. So benchmarking, I'll tell you all, we're working on that. We're working on a trifecta of benchmarking eventually with the objective of getting to performance. So the first is the commercial benchmarking ordinance. We just launched a task force that'll be meeting, I believe, next week. And it's got commercial property owners, our 2030 district and others. And it's really focused on just understanding how our buildings are performing so that we can be far more surgical in helping people lower their energy usage, have better indoor air quality and more safety in that space, and also elevate the high performers. Really understand who's doing something right, and then let them be the ambassadors to others about what they're doing and how they got there. We're working on the commercial side. Because we're large rental, this is the one that will likely be performance. We're working on a green rental efficiency standard so that you couldn't get the occupancy if you don't meet a performance standard in terms of efficiency, and think of that as sort of the floor. There's a wide spectrum in terms of how our rental units look. Some are great and people are doing a wonderful job, and some are, just standard, and that's fine. But some of them, people are literally paying to heat and cool the outdoors. There's gaping holes in windows, and that's just not acceptable. That's not safe. That it perpetuates inequalities in systems, because who's living in that place? And so those are the pieces of the market we're trying to bring up through this efficiency standard. So that'll be in the rental space. And then the third of the package is focused on single family homes. So we're looking at a time of sale. So think of this as when you go to the MLS and maybe you have kids and you look at the great school score. You could have an energy, and it's not based on Allison uses less energy than Sarah, and so it's kind of off the chart. It's really about the envelope itself and how that building is or is not sealed. So you can factor that in to your decision making, or maybe you don't, because it's not really relevant, but it is another variable that you could have in your decision making. So we plan to bring those as a package. They'll come sometime next year, probably before summer, for our electeds to be able to discuss. We've been actively working on them for a while, but we do have extensive stakeholder engagement in that process. We have an EV Readiness Ordinance that Sarah has. Sarah's on our planning commission and has seen this. And this is about major new developments, new developments and then major renovations, making sure that we have EV ready infrastructure in place as we gear up for what's coming, as our manufacturers are bringing more electric vehicles to market. We need to make sure we have the charging infrastructure so people can access that pretty equitably across the community. So that's coming. That's actually coming in a few weeks before our city council for the first reading for consideration. And then as I cheat, there's quite a few more things I'm having to talk about, but the only other one I wanted to elevate just first, well, actually, I'm going to elevate two more things very quickly. One is things that we don't have the control over, which are codes. And so we've been working with other municipalities throughout the state to really understand the code development process. So construction code, building code, energy code, and really make sure that we get our voice into those. Allison elevated that for Grand Rapids, about 70% of the buildings that are going to be there in 30 years are already here. Well, I can tell you it's far cheaper and more effective if you're going to build something new to build it right the first time, so we don't have to renovate it. And of course, we have to think about renovation. So we really want to push on those codes to make sure that that's all set. So new things coming online are built the right way and are safe and affordable and accessible to people. And then we can spend our time focusing on the retrofits and renovations of our existing infrastructure. So that's a really important area of work. And then lastly, for us, we are working on a program, we're calling it Reform. It's about how we combine renewable energy with deep energy efficiency, with electrification and equity, and I mean racial equity in this case, as well as some financial equity, to help transform our existing building stock, starting with a principle that I hope some of you will learn in equity training too, of targeted universalism. It's really focusing on those in the most need and helping our tenants really on the margins be able to make this transition. So hopefully they have a zero energy burden. And then when we solve for them, we actually solve for the entire market, how we make this happen. That was a lot, but those are just a few of the things we're on.
Well, that is a lot, but it's going to take a lot effectively, right? And it's heartening. I think there's some comments in the chat that you guys are addressing this from so many angles. Allison, what are you doing in Grand Rapids on benchmarking or other policy changes that might affect building owners?
Yeah, in full transparency, Ann Arbor is definitely farther along in their journey with respect to some policies. So like Missy said, not afraid to steal and learn from their experiences and understand and share, I should say. So I'm happy that we collaborate together on some of these areas. So a few things, as I mentioned, we're trying to come up with kind of this whole menu of policies, right? And working with some other cities across the country as well as within Michigan. And there are a lot of nuances that impact what type of policies we have the opportunity to pass, right? One, we are an upper Midwest climate. Electrification here looks very different than Southern California. They're not using that much natural gas. It's not real difficult for their building owners to transition or to change in terms of what they're buying. And so we have to be really mindful about that in terms of how we consider rolling those types of things out. Similarly, right, we have investor-owned utilities, and a lot of municipalities have their own municipally owned utility, and so they have the ability to, Holland, for example, they can offer on-bill financing, right? We don't have the ability to do that in Grand Rapids because we have investor-owned utilities. And then Missy touched on it, but for those that might not be familiar, we have Michigan State energy and building codes. And the way our codes are written we are not allowed to be more prescriptive or go above and beyond what is required at the Michigan level. And a lot of other cities in the country, again, they call it home rule. They have the ability at their city level to pass their own energy codes or their own building codes. And we don't have the ability to do that. And so we've been exploring some differences. And in full transparency, what we are learning from other cities in Massachusetts is similar to Michigan. So I have colleagues in the Cambridge and Boston area. It's more looking at potential building performance standards based on carbon reduction emissions. So other places are looking at energy performance, and they might say you have to hit a certain EUI by a certain year, or they might say you have to achieve a certain Energy Star score by a certain year, or make X percent energy reduction, right? Those are ways you can set up building performance standards based on energy. But many places feel that that runs contrary to your state energy code because we're not allowed to go in and make certain requirements in that area. So instead, it's still a building performance standard, but it is based on your carbon emissions. And so there's kind of two different ways you can set it. One is prescriptive, that tells you more what you might have to do or what carbon emissions you might have to meet at, in 10 years from now or 20 years from now or to get to 2050. What I've been told, again, from other cities is that tends to work better for smaller businesses or companies because it gives them more clarity around the opportunities that they have for different implementation and how it will help them achieve the ultimate requirement. But for a lot of bigger commercial buildings and companies, right, they already have capital plans that go quite far out into the future, right, and investment cycles and asset management plans and programs. And they already know they want to replace their roof at this year versus this year. And so a lot of feedback that I've learned from others that if you can provide flexibility for some of your bigger commercial businesses where it's more of just, within 20 years, you need to hit this and we'll have a couple checkpoints, but we want to grant you the flexibility that ultimately you can determine on what year you will achieve. And if you wait all the way until the year before it's required and you already have in your asset management plans that you plan to do an entire overhaul of your building in that year and it'll accomplish the required carbon emissions reductions that's been established, great, right? Like it doesn't matter if you didn't do anything in the 10 years before because we just want to give you that flexibility. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. The benchmarking and transparency, I'll be learning, I think that's the softer approach to going into any type of policy or regulation. But when I've asked other cities, have you seen very large gains merely from buildings tracking their own energy performance and reporting on it? And unfortunately, the answer is no, right? And where we need to get in the amount of carbon emission reductions that we need to achieve, we cannot just rely on benchmarking and transparency. I will say that we've dipped our toe in the water. We do have our 2030 district, and so we are partnering to ask people to do that voluntarily. But I worked, and last fall, our commission passed a marijuana licensing ordinance where we included some environmental sustainability requirements for any licensed cannabis facility has to participate in our 2030 district. So that's the benchmarking and transparency requirement there. We did go a little further, and for any grow operations, for those who are not familiar, cannabis facilities, blow any other facility out of the water in terms of how energy intensive they are. In Portland, they weren't prepared and had a lot of brownouts. I think Denver, their entire city's electricity generation grew pretty significantly just based on the industry coming online. And so we worked and have required all grow facilities to submit environmental sustainability plans where they talk about their carbon emissions, what they anticipate it will be. And they also have to submit a predictive energy load analysis to the utility so that they're working in partnership to ensure that the infrastructure in place will support the large growth in electricity consumption that's going to be needed. But then we also embedded a lighting requirement that they had to have 50% efficiency for their grow lighting. And so that's kind of our first attempt to kind of get into this space and understand it a little bit better. And I just want to touch on and bring back, because I know around the commercial building policy, we've struggled and thought, well, how do you build equity into these types of commercial building policies? And it seems a little more nuanced or difficult because, in all reality, most of the people owning and operating and managing these buildings are predominantly white. And so the ways that we've been exploring to build equity in, and this is true in our cannabis industry as well, is around, providing incentives to people who hire a certain number of employees from their neighborhoods, as well as people who are looking at through their construction contracts, what percentage are they going to commit to supporting micro local business enterprises or minority or women-owned businesses via subcontracts, in some of those other areas. So that's a little bit about how we are trying to look at how you can embed equity into some of these other commercial building opportunities.
Excellent. Again, going to the poll, I wanted to highlight that, and what you guys were just saying in terms of the changes that might need to happen at the state level is something that's come in as questions, and there's at least a vote that state policy is, from the audience's perspective, one of the hindrances. The question that I actually want to pose out to you, just so you know where I'm going. First, I'm going to ask about the state, and then I'm going to ask about utilities because Allison talked about investor-owned utilities. Missy, I know that that's something that you talked about a little bit earlier. So on the state level, the question that was posed was, it's great now that the governor has come forward with, a carbon neutrality goal of 2050. What's your opinion, option? Like, what's your thoughts on being more aggressive? Or you can choose to answer instead, how you think that's going to help you get some of the changes that you need to be able to implement what's going on at the local level. Like, what is your hope that that's going to spur? So, Alice, you want to start?
Sure. I'm going to try to keep mine brief, but I think this is really important. So 2 things that I think are required. One, data and data sharing. And I think, our DTE speaker talked about that a little bit, but, our utilities have all the data. We just need to get to a point where it's anonymized, but at a more local level, like census tract level, so we can better understand and have actual data to be working from versus just these ideas and estimates out there. It's much easier to work with your utility to say, share data than to try to work with the umpteen thousand different buildings or homes and hundreds of thousands within your community from a logistical standpoint. The other one is really around, the clean grid. Because ultimately, if our utility providers are sourcing 100% renewable energy, right, we're at zero carbon with respect to our electricity consumption, right? Natural gas is a little different. And so to me, the most economical approach is that our utilities are offering cleaner grids. And I know that they both, and I am thankful and grateful that they both have made commitments. I've told we mostly work with consumers as our electricity provider, right? Like, I want more and I want it faster because I don't think it's fast enough and it's not enough, right? And the more you do, quite frankly, the less I have to do at the local level and that everyone else benefits from. And so, right, we continue to partner with them on their own voluntary commitments. But we have also engaged at the legislative level. There was a Senate bill proposed to remove the 1% cap for solar. And so I had conversations with the chair of the Committee on Energy and Technology to talk about why removing that cap is so important and about those caps are almost met. And if we want to be allowing people to generate their own electricity locally, how instrumental that is. We also intervened in 2 Michigan Public Service Commission cases with Consumers Energy on their voluntary green pricing programs, as well as their distributed generation tariff, to really push back on a lot of areas where we think that those are key areas and levers that need to be pulled to allow us to meet our goals locally at a faster and quite frankly, more economical rate than what we would have to do if we had to do it on our own. I think the last thing I'll just state is, for those who are familiar with the IECC process, the International Energy Code process, I've learned a lot about this, but there was a big vote recently, which we got our city involved and our mayor involved in. And because Michigan often just adopts the International Energy Code, and in that code this year, there is an appendix that allows for the voluntary zero code to be adopted by local municipalities. And so we're going to be really engaging at the state level when it comes time to look at adopting that new energy code at the state level, that we are including that appendix, which would give our local municipalities the opportunity to have a voluntary zero code, if that's the way that the local cities or jurisdictions would like to move. So that's something that we're really focusing on as well.
Yeah, Sarah, so I guess I won't go too far into the state, but say I applaud the governor and the administration for making that commitment. Is it enough? No, but it's, it's one of a handful of states who've actually made that commitment, and we now need to create the plan. And so there is a committee that's being formed to figure out what exactly are the recommendations to achieving it. My sense is that the administration would be open to shaving time off if we create a pathway to make that happen. I don't know if that's true, but I think, they came out with a goal, and now they got to figure out how to do it. So if anyone's interested, they can apply to join that committee, help move it forward. Allison raises really, really good points about our utilities. And I think the fundamental thing I'll say is, yeah, we want more and we want it faster. And if you're not going to do it, then get out of the way. And I'm going to go further than her and say they are one of the biggest impediments to success. And it's great that they're doing these things, but the truth is they're lobbying for legislation that puts caps on things, that makes it really hard to do the right thing. And our values are different. My job is to protect the health and the safety of Ann Arborites and to work with others throughout the state to do that in Michigan. Their job is to make money, and they're just not the same. And so we have a lot of things in a Venn diagram that overlap where we collaborate, and we have things where we clearly do not, and we have very different values. So we also intervene. We're in intervention with our utility right now on their voluntary green pricing program. So we're DTE territory, so they've just submitted. There are things about that program we like, and there's a whole lot we don't. And we're going to push really hard and fast to make that more equitable and more accessible to others, and actually reflect true market pricing and competition on the market. So it's complicated and it's real, and I constantly have to remind myself that we just aren't the same. We are not a monopoly-owned utility. That's not what the city is, right? Like, I am beholden to my constituents, and they determine a lot of what we do and how we do it. Our utilities just are not the same.
Great. I think it's true in both of the investor-owned utilities that you're in. DTE started out the keynote today talking about some of the programs that they have available for building owners, particularly in the C&I territory. And on the poll, people are saying, like, one of the key things that they're doing is educating their own staff about energy efficiency and the programs that are available. Is there anything specific that you have been doing with respect to reaching out to building owners about that? I know you both have 2030 districts. Beyond those districts, what other work are you doing specifically related to kind of the commercial building sector?
Ours has predominantly been through our 2030 district, so we partner strongly with them to do education in this session. We're really going to focus more on it in 2021 with the engagement, sessions and the work that we're going to try to do around building policies. But I will note that just on the equity side, we did have some participation on our equitable economic development and mobility plan that was created for the city of Grand Rapids, where commercial building owners were represented and participated there. And I've been working with colleagues where we're building out an equity scorecard for what is often, larger commercial property developments and projects. And so we are looking at it from that aspect. But more specific to your question, ours has been, not a lot specific from the city. It's been through 2030, but we will be partnering to do more next year.
Great.
And it's similar, and I think there's a reason it's similar. The 2030 district for us is organized and they're trusted. And so it makes sense to kind of funnel work through them. And so that is what we do. The kinds of things that are coming down the hopper, certainly with the benchmarking, as we talked about. And then we have a really successful residential solar program called Solarize, where our residents come together in mass. It's like a Tupperware party, if you will, but for solar. And so Allison might invite her neighbors and people that trust Allison, and she's found a solar installer, and that solar installer has negotiated discounts so that basically they're marketing their outreach budget, they're passing those savings on to folks. So we've been giving most people, they've been able to achieve through this program about 15% additional off the cost of solar, and then they're getting the 26% federal tax incentive. So they're accessing solar at a much, much cheaper rate. Like, that's not equitable, that's not equal across the market. So we have other things I can talk about, but we've gotten a lot of bites from the commercial sector. So now we're crafting the program for what it looks like in commercial, because that's a little different. And that's also bigger, right? It's not a 5 kilowatt system. You might be talking about 25 kilowatt, 150 kilowatt system. So we're working on that, and we expect to roll something out next year.
I forgot to mention, Sarah, we do have an energy advisory committee, which I should have mentioned earlier, that our mayor and 2 of our commissioners sit on. And I think Missy has a similar kind of council in Ann Arbor, but we do have representatives from our commercial building industry, both big business and small business, as well as our utility partners and some of our neighborhood organizations that sit on that committee that do, their purpose is to help Grand Rapids stay at the forefront of energy and have their voice represented there.
Excellent. I'm looking at the time and realizing this is probably the last question. And there's lots of things going on. What do you think, what can the average citizen, right, the person listening to this, do to help you achieve the goals? Like, what is the primary thing that the average person can do?
Tell your commissioners or your council members how important it is that they stay focused on carbon emissions reductions and climate change work is a big one, right? There are a lot of competing priorities, quite frankly, right now with COVID and economic recovery and community police relations, right? That's what they're hearing the most from community about. So that's what they're going to prioritize. I know Ann Arbor has some great constituents that voice their concerns around that. And so that helps. So in Grand Rapids, I would say, I think that would be really important to do that. But then I would say start looking at your own processes. And if you really are interested in going on this equity journey, start looking around the work that you do and how can you get more information? How can you share it? How can you influence your networks? How can you bring in more people that traditionally have not been at the table or a part of your conversations or on your board, so that you can start having these conversations and moving the needle for more more equitable results and quality of living for all people across our communities.
Second, Allison, I would say in our society, we vote in 2 ways. We vote at a ballot box and we vote with our dollar. And so making investments in terms of what you buy, how you buy it, what you don't buy is really important. And when I talk to people who really want to do this work, I say just, I'll steal from Frozen 2, do the next right thing, right? So the next time something comes up, it's not like you have to just gut your entire home and do work, but the next time you have a chance to replace an appliance, make it an electric appliance if you can do it. Just kind of incrementalism. But I will add, one of my big bugaboos is every one of us on this phone could do everything right, and the system is still broken. And so we have to fix the system. And Allison talked about that from an equity standpoint. We have systemic racism, institutional racism that exists. We also have a system that privileges extraction, and that's extraction of natural resources. And we have to push on that system. And that's where we're really going to see change. So making individual action matters. Scaling that action by telling others is important, but we have to push on the system. The system is broken.
The system is broken. I would suggest, though, that I really applaud the work that both of you are doing in helping your cities work with the system that we have and push for those changes to that system. I think based on the chat, not so many questions in chat, as many as happy comments about all of the work that you're doing and how inspiring it is. So I want to thank you for sharing with me and for all of those that are listening today. And again, for your continued work. And Jillian, I think we wrapped up close to being on time.
You wrapped up exactly on time. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Missy and Allison. This was a great conversation, and the chat reflects that too. A lot of high praises for you three. So if folks on the call are interested in getting more involved or speaking about the conversations that Missy and Allison and Sarah were talking about, many of the links have been posted in the chat, on the stage, and in the event for you to connect more with what they're doing, as well as the speakers and attendees are invited to join networking over there on the left-hand side, where you can speak with everybody one-on-one over time, not everybody at once. And also join the expo too. There's a lot of amazing booths there. Ken Randazzo will be in the Detroit 2030 district booth for you to speak with him, as well as the Grand Rapids 2030 district has a booth as well. Did I miss anything? I think that I got all of that. Lastly, folks, make sure you come and visit us next week, Thursday, same time, same place, at the registration available on Michigan Battle to Buildings website on the tab for Michigan Energy Summit. Next week will be the PACE and Michigan Saves and Incentives conversation, why the bottom line makes sense. So feel free to tune to us there, and I'll see you all at networking. Thank you so much, the three of you. Thank you.